Wonderful. Hi, folks. My name is Jason Ray. I am co-founder, CEO at Paperless Parts. We are a company that's building solutions for the industrial supply chain. We have a software platform that serves Tier 1 through Tier 4 contract manufacturers, really helps them with front office, so estimating, organization, collaboration, communication. My background is Navy supply chain logistics, so I spent 7 years on active duty as a supply corps officer. Stepping out of the Navy, I come to realize very quickly that what we did, we called supply chain logistics, is very different than what you all do. And we've gotten a unique perspective over the last 10 years in working with a lot of the contract manufacturers across aerospace and defense, medical devices, semiconductors, mostly in North America, but we're starting to expand internationally. So my biggest goal for today is knowing that not all of you are sitting in the industrial supply chain, is that you can take away at least one interesting piece of information. And I fully recognize that what I have to say may not be perfectly applicable to what you are working on, but I think we can share some unique insights. How many people recognize this? Okay, great. I was like, wow, no one's going to raise their hand. All right, so this is an intersection, a Parisian intersection around the Arc de Triomphe. It is widely regarded as one of the most complicated and riskiest intersections in the world. There are no traffic lights. There are no lines on the road, really. There are very few rules other than like yield right. And it's where accidents happen almost every hour of every day. So much so that if you are an insurance company, you charge people more if they drive through this intersection on a daily basis. So you may be saying, what does this have to do with supply chain logistics? What does it have to do with managing your suppliers and creating resiliency? And it very much, I look at this as a fantastic analogy for what we're seeing in the industrial supply chain. So what we know about the industrial supply chain comes from working with your suppliers, your contract manufacturers. And what we've seen is the accidents happen at intersections. And as you move further and further away from the epicenter, where the core decision is made to go down one of these 12 avenues, you have more potential risk of getting further and further away from the desired result. And so these accidents continue to perpetuate, and they chew away at supply chain resiliency. So what we're trying to highlight here, and I'll give you a great example. What we see in our customer base today is as you move from OEM, let's call that OEM Boeing, and you go from Boeing to GE. So I've got the airplane, now I have the engine of the airplane, and I go from GE to GS Precision, and I go from GS Precision to Brian's Machine Shop, all the way down the tiers of the supply chain. The files get shared via email or via a portal. They get opened, they get cut apart, they get repackaged. When I say files, I mean designs, drawings, 3D CAD models. And each time I'm moving from the OEM Boeing to GE to GS to Brian's Machine Shop, there's an information that's being lost, and there's a risk of mistakes. And I think that these risks really perpetuate the lack of supply chain resiliency that all of you are pushing for. So as I mentioned, everything we know about the industrial supply chain comes from working with contract manufacturers. We work with about 800 of them across the United States. They quote and do about $65 billion worth of work in our platform every year. So we have a really interesting picture of what's going on in the supply chain. The thing that stands out to me the most is it's getting more and more complicated, the work that they are doing. The RFQ packages are getting larger and larger. And what we're seeing is as there's a push for efficiency in supply chain management, there are fewer supply chain managers that are now using software to group things together and make the work, the administrative burden, move downstream. So I put this slide up here. This is meant to represent a digital thread. How many people have heard of the digital thread? Has anyone ever seen it work? Okay, awesome. So my presentation is not about the digital thread. Thank you. You've heard AI, what, 40 times so far today? Let's talk about AI for a second. So I try to be more of a tech realist than a tech evangelist. So I think of the digital thread and AI as very similar to trying to go back to this intersection and literally lay train tracks right through the intersection, right? It's not going to happen. You're not going to go into any city, New York, Boston, and bulldoze all the intersections and lay train tracks to eliminate the accidents. You're not going to be able to do that. So we're going to have to take a slightly different approach to this problem. And I don't think technology in and of itself is going to be the one-size-fits-all solution. It's very improbable to think that you'll be able to build a digital thread across your supply chain, get all of your suppliers using the same software, get all of your partners reading off the same file format, let alone the exact same digital representation of that file. It's even more unrealistic that you're going to be able to hook into all of their machines and see all their data and understand their capacity, let alone the fact that they don't want you to know that. So we have to work through the trust elements, and we heard a little bit about that in the first keynote. So from my perspective, this is kind of BS. And so we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about picking the low-hanging fruit. I'm a big path of least resistance, low-hanging fruit. I find, I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal the other day. It was talking about how 95% of corporate AI projects are failing. Did anybody see that headline? And it's failing because I think there's an enormous amount of hype that then, and cost associated with it. I'm also seeing a lot of AI startups go from 0 to 100 million in revenue in a year or 2 years, and that's kind of a crazy trajectory. Well, they have to charge you an enormous amount of money to justify the amount of money they're raising from their investors, and at the same time, when they sell you something that's really expensive, you have to turn around and you have to go sell a project to your leadership that is equally as impactful in generating that kind of an ROI. And so now we have this misaligned expectations, which really fall into this concept of the Gartner hype cycle. Has anyone heard of Gartner hype cycle? It's this, you reach this peak of inflated expectations, and then the bubble pops, and you fall back into this trough of disillusionment. And so, from my perspective, I would much rather take the easy problems and start with the simple things that you can do well that build resiliency and build profitability into your supply chain. We think a lot about supply chain resiliency, and I can tell you that a profitable supply chain is probably one of the most resilient. So what do you do? Where's the low-hanging fruit? Where can we make progress without having to go lay train tracks through every intersection? The first thing I want to talk about is operating at 60,000 feet. So what we've seen is that as large OEMs and as large tier 1 manufacturers start to adopt more supply chain management technology, they remove the human element from it. So we watch RFQs, requests for quotes, come into our platform from our customers. And in the early days, those were 10, 20, 30 unique designs, unique part numbers that these customers would be asking their suppliers to evaluate and quote. More recently, we're seeing enormous packages. So not 100, not 1,000. We just saw 44,000 unique part numbers come in, and the OEM said to our customer, we'd like you to quote that in a week. So that's looking at 44,000 unique designs in 5 days and providing, here's what we think it will cost, estimates that you are then held to, and turnaround times, let alone if you buy one or you buy 100 or you buy 1,000, that totally changes the entire potential turnaround time for everything you're buying. So how do you even navigate that? My advice would be, we can't operate at that 60,000 feet. Sending over all of these items and not understanding or having any real rhyme or reason of why these items are batched together, we call it spray and pray sourcing. So what that is sit down, you package everything up you want, you fire it out to all of your suppliers, and you let them raise their hands and opt in to what they should be producing for you. We see this a lot in aerospace and defense. We see it a lot in the semiconductor industry. We even see it across the industrials like the John Deeres and the Caterpillars of the world. We would argue that being more intentional with what you are batching together based on an understanding of what you are buying produces a much better result and a much faster response time. So I think you can use technology to solve those problems. No surprises. I hate surprises. I say this to my wife all the time, like good, bad. I don't really like being surprised. I get nervous when she like sneaks in and, taps me on the shoulder when I'm in the office. I don't like surprises. And I think in general, I don't think your suppliers like surprises either. And I think we can avoid a lot of those surprises by highlighting where the risk is. You all likely, or someone on your team likely knows what the gotchas are. We just did a survey of contract manufacturers, and 57% of them said over the last 24 months, they have lost money because they missed a critical requirement. Just missed something. They were putting together their proposals, they missed a paragraph, they missed a note, they missed a call out, a tolerance, and that caused them to lose money. Now, when they lose money, I think a lot of people think about that as cash out of some corporate conglomerate's pockets, and in the reality, it's actually just taking money out of a pool that can be invested in workforce development, training, new equipment. When you go out and you ask these industrial suppliers, the contract manufacturers, what do you do with your profits? Very few of them are like, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a mansion. Most of them are like, well, no, I'm going to reinvest in new equipment and we're going to build another facility. We're going to keep growing. We're going to put money back into the business. And very few of them have access to outside capital because they're small businesses. So instead of being able to go out and get venture capital like we do, they have to do it the hard way, which is reinvesting profitability. So each time they lose money because they're being surprised, it erodes your supply chain resiliency. We see a lot of offloading of administrative burden. So we talked about this 44,000 line item package. Well, the other thing we're seeing is in order to actually work with that data, our customers, they have to go and they log into a portal. How many people use portals for sourcing? Anybody? Okay. So there is a portal, the mythical portal. There are a lot of different companies that produce these, but what ends up happening, and I'm not sure if you've sat with your suppliers to see this, but what ends up happening is they get a request, and in that request, it's an email, and it says, please click here to go see what this request is made up of. And they click the link, and they log into the portal, and now all of a sudden they have a list of part numbers, and that list can be 10, 20, 1,000, 3,000, 44,000. Well, then what they have to do is they have to go part number by part number, and they search for the files, and they download the files. And then they have to read all of those files and understand, are there amplifying certifications or are there amplifying specifications? And then they go to another portal and they have to download those. So I'll tell you that when we talk to our customers, the higher up in the industrial supply chain they are, the more full-time equivalents they have dedicated to simply going in and downloading information out of different systems. Do you think, and I don't mean anything, no disrespect here, but do you think these are the highest paid people? So we go back to this clicker. I won't make you go back to the intersection so you can all picture it in your head. And you wonder why those accidents happen, right? I'm hand typing part numbers into a system because the list I got was in a PDF format that I can't even copy off of, which is kind of crazy to think about. But I've sat with these people and watched them do their job for hours. And they will literally sit there and hand type one by one into the system. And then you wonder why there's mistakes, and you wonder why there's late deliveries or a new revision of a part doesn't show up on time. It happens because we're putting a lot of this administrative burden down into the supply chain. So I think there's some stat that like over $1 billion, maybe even more a year, of mistakes is caused by Excel spreadsheets. It's like Excel is like one of the most powerful tools in the entire world. I love it. I think it's incredible. And at the same time, when we work with our customers to onboard them into our estimating solution, we will often take their Excel spreadsheets and we will start to program that into a modern software platform. I can tell you that literally every month we find errors in the way they were calculating their costs in Excel, and we'll say, oh my gosh, like how long have you been using this spreadsheet? And it's like, well, 25 years. The guy who built it is no longer here. He retired 10 years ago, and we've just been kind of riding that spreadsheet. And I'm telling you today that I think there's an enormous amount of risk sitting in a lack of information systems that are being used in your supply chain. So you can't invest without being profitable, but also knowing the right systems to invest in. I think you guys all have supplier days. You all sit down with your suppliers, helping them understand where to take the first step into adopting modern technology. One of the things that I've come to understand about our industrial supply chain, at least in the United States, is there's a few paradigms that are taking place. The first is people are retiring. So there's about 5 years from now, we are going to lose an enormous amount of skill in our industrial supply chain. So that's really scary. The second one is most people didn't get into this industry to do paperwork. They didn't start a machine shop to work in Excel spreadsheets. They didn't get into the industry. Well, the most experienced estimators, the most experienced people sitting in the front office, they didn't get into the industry to do that either. They got pulled off the shop floor because they're the ones that know how the sausage gets made. And so now they sit in the front office and they're being asked to drive this really complicated process that's not supported by technology, and they've never evaluated software technology. I mean, we've sat through tens of thousands of demos of our software to a customer base that has really never adopted modern software before. And it's kind of wild to see how they evaluate it. So I think a lot of them will be looking to you as thought partners in how to find, identify, ensure that the software is secure, ensure that it meets your standards. So I would encourage you to help your suppliers really focus on eliminating these spreadsheets and these silos of information. How many people use should cost tools? A lot? Yeah, great. I really appreciate all of you raising your hands, by the way. It's more just a way to make sure everybody's not sleeping. I can't see you that well, but it's one of the things that we've noticed as we've gone into should cost tools and we've looked at these different tools, especially when you look at industrial components, is they don't take yield into consideration, which is really kind of a weird paradigm. They go in and they look at it and they say, well, this part should cost this when made in this universe with this equipment. And very rarely is it like, well, we're buying 100 of them, which means 100 are going to go to the plater, which also means that there's probably 3 or 4 of them that are going to get dropped in the tank and are going to get ruined, which means we need to send 103 to the plater. And there's going to be a setup part because we're going to break a tool when we run the tool path the first time, and that's going to be scrap. And now all of a sudden I have, call it, need to make 107 to get 100. And that's your spare tire, right? Like how many people just bought a car that the spare tire is not there anymore? I'm like, what the hell am I supposed to do? I literally opened the trunk of our X5 and I'm like, there's just a hole. Like, you're trying to save money? Like, what happened here? Like, that's supply chain efficiency at its finest, right? I'm screwed when I get out and have a flat tire. I have to push the help me BMW button, which is total crap because I want to solve the problem myself. But I look at this and I say, okay, well, we just have to be realistic because at the end of the day, if the paradigm is true that a more profitable supply chain is more resilient, then we can't pull that risk and pull that potential earning out of our negotiations. And I also sit on the other side of the table where I say, well, it's your responsibility to not go drive over nails all day, so I'm not going to be paying for your spare tires. You have to be reasonable about where that potential risk lies. But it is a very imperfect world, especially when you are making highly complicated aerospace, semiconductor, medical device components. It is. It's difficult. Metalworking is hard. And I think, how many people know about 3D printing? I could have talked about that as another one of the this will solve all of supply chain problems. Let's put this on the desk of the engineers, and then we won't need all the supply chain managers. It'll be amazing. That didn't work. Ford tried it. We watched their stock price kind of follow. So that didn't go so well for them. But I think at the end of the day, being realistic about where that risk lies and sharing that risk with your supply chain, harder conversation than just standing up here saying it, but I do see that as something that will help build that resiliency you're all looking for. So at the end of the day, the results, more targeted sourcing, risk identified before mistakes happen. I'd really like to get out in front of it. So understanding hey, this is likely where a supplier is going to make a mistake. And sharing that information with them. There's this perspective, specifically in aerospace and defense, where the suppliers have this concept of win some, lose some. So they say, we're going to win some, we're going to lose some. And I've said, well, why? Why are you going to win and why are you going to lose? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you ever lose? And they're like, well, the OEMs, they want us to lose. They want us to miss out, so they get good on a few of these. And, you know, we'll have some where we can make it up and we'll be okay. And I think that concept of win some, lose some is really a losing paradigm, because you need a resilient supply chain. And I'll tell you a story. We just watched a contract manufacturer doing $100 million in revenue a year, which is huge when you think about contract manufacturers in the United States, and most of them are sitting around 10 million in revenue. So this business was doing 100 million a year, and they went out of business on one part. One mistake. That's how fragile your supply chain is in the cash operating cycles that they have to deal with. They do not have the ability to absorb mistakes. So if you can help them not experience the paradigm of win some, lose some, everybody needs to be winning. Lastly, more efficient supplier relationships. I've been amazed at how many supply chain managers or procurement professionals say, oh, our suppliers love us. And then we talk to our customers and they're kind of like, we don't really love them. We have to work with them because they make up 25% of our revenue. Building that relationship is foundational too. What is it? The Toyota Way is like one of those like staple books. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands again because I'm almost done. But that's like a staple. Well, I think a lot of what we've seen in this industry is folks pick and choose what they want to do. It's like, let's do just-in-time manufacturing, but let's not really partner with the supply chain to absorb risk. And let's try to adopt these different technologies and this different process, but without understanding the ripple effects of it. So I would encourage you to really think through the ripple effects and really think through the human-to-human relationships. Because as much as AI is going to transform the world, I think it really all comes back to you all sitting here. That's where the benefit's going to come from. That's where the magic's going to happen. It's people. So thank you. I don't.
What do you got?
Yeah, I'm at.
Questions for Jason? Here you
Don't
go,
feel
sir.
obligated.
Here you go, Jason. Question right over here.
Hey, Jason, as you were speaking, a smile was coming out of my face, specifically on integrating, let's say, engineering software with your software. Like, do you guys integrate Windchill into your software?
Literally sitting in PTC's office the other day. So we're looking at figuring out how we can help connect the supply chain to reduce the portals. One of the things, so we were talking about a digital thread, and you brought up a really good comment here. I think the digital thread gets broken for the very first time in the OEM organization, because you have engineering and you have supply chain, and engineering has one mission and one set of software solutions, and then supply chain is using, I think what was talked about, Ariba up here is probably one of the most common tools, and those don't normally talk to each other. So one of the things that we've been working on is integrating our solution, Paperless Parts, into the source of truth for the technical data. So absolutely. And it's a very insightful comment, because often one of the things that makes the job of the supply chain harder is the progressively declining fidelity of information as you move from the source of design. So you have a designer that's working in 3D model simulation, building this super complex aerospace part, and then you get down to tier 4, where they're still held to the highest standard, but they're working off of a redacted drawing, like 2D paper drawing. That's like, and you expect there to not be problems? It's kind of like AI is not going to solve that. That is a really freaking hard problem. So thank you.